My stepmom and stepsister secretly planned to kick me out of the house and take control of all my assets. They planted jewelry in my bag and accused me of stealing it. When I opened the bag, I was shocked to find the jewelry inside. My stepmom called the police, and I was arrested. They laughed, thinking they had won. But within 2 hours, they never expected the shocking surprise that awaited them. My name is Sophia, and my life changed forever 2 years ago. I used to think I knew what happiness felt like. Our home was warm, filled with love and laughter, and everything felt safe. That was when my mom was still alive. She was the glue that held our family together, the person who could make any bad day feel better with just a smile.
But then she got sick.
Cancer came into our lives like a thief, stealing her piece by piece until she was gone. I was only 17, and I felt like my world had collapsed. After she passed, everything started to fall apart. My dad, Mark, threw himself into work, trying to escape the grief, I guess. He barely spoke to me, and our house felt empty, like a shell of what it used to be. I tried to hold it together, but every day felt heavier than the last. For a year, I kept telling myself that things would get better, that Dad would come back to me, and we'd figure out how to move forward together. But instead, he came back with someone else.
Her name was Diana.
My dad introduced her as his new wife one night at dinner, like it was nothing. I didn't even know he was dating someone, let alone planning to remarry. She walked into our house with this air of authority, like she owned the place. And she didn't come alone. Her daughter, Ella, a year younger than me, followed her in with this smug little smirk that made my skin crawl. "Sophia," my dad said that night, "I know this is sudden, but I believe Diana and Ella will bring some happiness back into our lives. I need you to welcome them as part of our family." Part of our family? I didn't know how to respond. I felt like a stranger in my own home as Diana started making changes. She insisted that Ella and I share my room because it would help us bond. When I objected, my dad sided with her. It was like he'd stopped seeing me altogether and was now only focused on pleasing his new wife. The first few weeks were tense. Ella and I didn't get along. She acted like she owned the room and treated me like I didn't belong. I started noticing little things. How Diana always found ways to insert herself into Dad's decisions. How Ella would smile when Diana said something dismissive about me. It wasn't just annoying. It felt calculated. One day, while I was studying in the kitchen, I overheard them talking in low voices. They didn't know I was there. "We just need to be patient," Diana said. "Mark trusts me completely now. Soon, we'll have everything under control." I froze.
What were they talking about? Was it about me?
I couldn't ask Dad. He was so wrapped up in Diana's charm that I doubted he'd believe me. But I knew something wasn't right. Things escalated when Diana started commenting on my every move. "Sophia, don't you think you should help more around the house?" Or, "Sophia, your grades have been slipping lately. Are you even trying?" Ella joined in too, always with that smug smile. I felt like I was under constant surveillance. The turning point came when Diana accused me of stealing her jewelry. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the living room when she stormed in, holding an empty jewelry box. "Sophia," she screamed. "My necklace is missing." I stood up confused. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I know it was you. Ella saw you in my room yesterday." I looked at Ella, who was sitting on the couch with her phone, pretending to look concerned. "I didn't take anything," I said firmly. "Why would I?" Diana didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed my arm and dragged me to my room. Dad followed, looking confused but not defending me. "Open your bag," Diana demanded. I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you serious? You think I stole from you?" "If you didn't, you have nothing to hide," she shot back. Reluctantly, I unzipped my bag, and there it was, the necklace, buried under my clothes. My heart stopped. I knew it hadn't been there before. "See?" Diana said triumphantly. "I told you." I tried to explain, but no one listened. Dad just stood there, silent, as Diana called the police. Within an hour, I was sitting in the back of a squad car, humiliated and terrified. I kept telling the officers that I was innocent, that someone had set me up, but they only said, "We'll figure this out at the station." As I sat in that cold interrogation room, replaying everything in my mind, one thing became clear. Diana and Ella had planned this. They wanted me out of the house, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. That's when the investigator walked in. He introduced himself as Detective Carter, a man in his 50s with kind but sharp eyes. "Sophia," he said, sitting down across from me, "I want to hear your side of the story." And that's where everything began to change. I sat across from Detective Carter, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to steady my voice. "It wasn't me," I told him. "The necklace was planted in my bag. I don't know how, but Diana and Ella set me up. They've been trying to push me out of the house since they moved in." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a quiet intensity. "Why would they do that?" he asked. I hesitated, unsure if he'd believe me. "Because they want control over the house, my dad, everything. I've seen the way Diana manipulates him. She's already convinced him to change so much, and now they want me gone." He didn't interrupt, just nodded for me to continue. So I told him everything, the comments, the smug smiles, the way Diana always seemed to twist things to make me look bad. By the time I finished, my throat was dry, and I was exhausted. I didn't know if I'd convinced him, but at least someone had finally listened. Detective Carter folded his hands. "Sophia, these are serious accusations. But I've been doing this job long enough to know when something doesn't add up. I'm going to dig into this, but you need to stay calm and cooperate. Do you understand?" I nodded, relief washing over me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone was on my side. The next day, I was released from custody while the investigation continued. My dad didn't pick me up. I had to take a cab home. When I walked through the front door, Diana and Ella were sitting in the living room, looking smug as ever. My dad stood nearby, his arms crossed and his face unreadable. "Sophia," Diana said with an icy smile, "we're glad you're home. But you need to understand how serious this is. We've decided it's best if you stay in your room while we figure out the next steps." "Figure out the next steps?" I snapped. "You mean while you try to convince Dad to kick me out?" "Enough, Sophia," my dad barked, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. "You've already caused enough trouble. Don't make this worse."
His words hit me like a slap.
I wanted to scream, to make him see what was really happening, but I could tell it was useless. Diana had him completely under her spell. I stormed upstairs, slamming my door behind me. My room felt like a prison, and I could barely breathe. But as I sat there, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let them win. They thought they'd broken me, but they didn't know what I was capable of. The next few days were tense. I stayed in my room as much as possible, avoiding Diana and Ella. Meanwhile, Detective Carter started digging. He called me a few times, asking for more details about Diana and Ella, and I answered as best I could. Then, one evening, he showed up at our house unannounced. I was in my room when I heard the doorbell ring. Curious, I crept to the top of the stairs, just out of sight, and listened. "Mrs. Hayes," Carter said, his voice calm but firm, "I'd like to ask you and your daughter a few questions about the missing necklace." "Of course," Diana replied smoothly. "Anything we can do to help." "Great," Carter said. "Can we talk in the living room?" They moved out of sight, and I strained to hear. For the next 30 minutes, I caught bits and pieces of their conversation. Carter asked about the day of the alleged theft, their relationship with me, and their lives before moving in. Diana's answers were polished and rehearsed, but I noticed something. Ella was unusually quiet. After Carter left, Diana and Ella had a hushed argument in the kitchen. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but Ella's voice was high-pitched and anxious. Something was unraveling, and I knew it was only a matter of time. The next day, Carter called me. "Sophia, I think you were right," he said. "We've found some interesting information on Diana and Ella's past. Can you come down to the station tomorrow?" When I arrived, he showed me the file. It was filled with records, court documents, old police reports, even news clippings. Diana had a history of fraud, and Ella had been involved in a shoplifting ring a few years ago. "This paints a very different picture of them," Carter said. "And I found evidence that the necklace was planted in your bag. We're building a case against them, but we need a little more." He asked if I could stay alert and let him know if I noticed anything suspicious. I agreed, though the idea of being in the same house as them made my stomach turn. That night, I overheard them arguing again. Diana's voice was sharp. "You were supposed to keep your mouth shut," she hissed. I didn't say anything. Ella shot back. "But what if they figured out?" My heart raced as I recorded the exchange on my phone. It wasn't much, but it was something. I sent it to Carter immediately. The tension in the house was unbearable over the next few days. Diana and Ella seemed more on edge, and my dad was oblivious to it all. I kept my head down, waiting for Carter to make his move. Finally, one morning the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't just Carter, it was two uniformed officers. Diana and Ella were taken into custody, their protests ringing through the house. My dad looked stunned, his face pale as he watched his wife and stepdaughter being led away. "What's going on?" he asked Carter, his voice shaking. "Mr. Hayes," Carter said gently, "we have evidence that Diana and Ella framed Sophia for theft. There's also a history of criminal activity in Diana's past that you should be aware of." My dad turned to me, his eyes filled with guilt and pain. "Sophia? I had no idea." "Maybe you should have listened to me," I said quietly, my voice trembling. As Diana and Ella were driven away, I felt a mix of relief and anger. Justice was being served, but the damage they'd done couldn't be undone. Watching Diana and Ella being taken away in handcuffs should have felt like a victory. But as the police car disappeared down the street, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt numb. My dad, Mark, stood frozen by the door, his face pale and drawn. For the first time, the reality of what had been happening finally hit him. And me? I wasn't sure if I wanted to yell at him or collapse into tears. He turned to me, his voice trembling. "Sophia, I don't know what to say. Maybe you could start with an apology," I said quietly, not trusting myself to say more. I walked past him and went to my room, shutting the door behind me. The house was eerily quiet for the rest of the day. I stayed in my room, replaying everything in my mind, the accusations, the betrayal, the lies. I thought about my mom and how different things might have been if she were still here. Would my dad have seen through Diana sooner? Would he have protected me? It was a spiral I couldn't stop, and by the time the sun set, I was exhausted. The next morning, my dad knocked on my door. When I didn't answer, he opened it and stepped inside. "Sophia," he began, his voice heavy with regret, "I know I failed you. I should have seen what was happening. I should have listened to you." I didn't look at him.
"Why didn't you?"
"Why did you trust them over me?" He sighed, sitting down on the edge of my bed. "After your mom died, I didn't know how to handle things. I felt lost, and when Diana came into my life, she seemed like the answer. She was supportive, confident, everything I thought I needed. I didn't realize. I didn't see what she was doing." I turned to him then, tears in my eyes.
"You didn't just fail me, Dad.
You chose her. You let her destroy everything." He looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he nodded. "You're right. I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." I didn't know if I could forgive him, but I could see the sincerity in his eyes. For now, that had to be enough. Over the next few weeks, the case against Diana and Ella unfolded. Detective Carter kept me updated, and it was like peeling back the layers of a rotten onion. Diana had been married twice before, and in both cases, she'd used manipulation to gain control of her husband's assets. Ella had been her accomplice, helping her scheme and cover her tracks. Together, they'd orchestrated a plan to push me out of the house, hoping to gain full control over my dad's business and finances. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, text messages, and the recording I'd made of their argument all painted a clear picture of their guilt. When the trial began, I was called to testify. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, sitting in that courtroom, facing the people who had tried to ruin my life. Diana's cold glare never left me, but Ella wouldn't meet my eyes. I think she knew they'd lost. The judge didn't need much convincing. Diana and Ella were both convicted of conspiracy and fraud. Diana received a lengthy prison sentence, while Ella, being younger and less involved in the financial crimes, was sent to a rehabilitation program. It was over. They couldn't hurt me anymore. Back at home, things were different. My dad was really trying to repair our relationship. He apologized every day, not just with words but with actions. He started spending more time with me, asking about my life, and making an effort to understand how I felt. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching an old movie my mom used to love, he turned to me and said, "I filed for divorce from Diana today." I looked at him, surprised. "You did?" He nodded. "There's no fixing what she did. And honestly, I don't want to. I just want to focus on us now, on rebuilding what I broke." For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. "I'd like that," I said softly. We spent the next few weeks clearing out the house, getting rid of anything that reminded us of Diana and Ella. It was like shedding old skin, letting go of the weight of their presence. Bit by bit, the house started to feel like home again. But even with Diana and Ella gone, the scars they left behind didn't fade overnight. I had nightmares sometimes, waking up in a cold sweat with the memory of that humiliating arrest playing in my mind. My dad would come to my room, sitting with me until I calmed down. "I'm here," he'd say. "I'm not going anywhere." And slowly, I started to believe him. Things weren't perfect, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I'd survived the betrayal, the lies, and the pain. And now I had the chance to rebuild, not just with my dad, but with myself. The hardest part of my story wasn't exposing Diana and Ella or clearing my name. It was learning to trust again, to let go of the anger and move forward. But I was getting there, one step at a time. It's strange how life can change so much in just a few months. For a long time, I felt like I was stuck in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But now, as I sit here telling this story, it feels like I've finally stepped into the light. The worst is behind me, and for the first time in years, I can see a future worth building. After Diana and Ella were out of our lives, things started to shift. My dad was different, not perfect, but better. He was present in a way he hadn't been since my mom passed. It wasn't easy for him to face what had happened. He carried so much guilt for trusting the wrong people and for failing to protect me when I needed him most. But he didn't run from it. Instead, he used it as a reason to be better. One evening, about a month after Diana's trial, my dad sat me down at the kitchen table. There was a stack of papers in front of him. "Sophia," he said, his voice steady but serious, "I want to show you something." He slid the papers toward me, and I saw that they were legal documents. "These are the changes I've made to my will and the business," he explained. "I've made sure that everything is secure and you're the primary beneficiary. No one will ever be able to take that away from you again." I stared at the documents, a lump forming in my throat. "You didn't have to do this," I said softly.
"I did," he replied.
"I need you to know that I'll never let anyone hurt you like that again. This is my way of making sure you're protected, no matter what." For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about knowing my dad was on my side again. We were rebuilding the bond Diana and Ella had tried so hard to break. One afternoon, I decided to visit Detective Carter at the precinct to thank him for everything he'd done. Without him, I don't know where I'd be.
He smiled when he saw me.
"Sophia," he said, "I was hoping I'd hear from you."
"How are things?"
"Better," I said, honestly. "A lot better, thanks to you." He waved me off. "I just did my job. You're the one who stayed strong through it all. That takes real courage." His words stuck with me. For so long, I'd felt like a victim, powerless against Diana and Ella's schemes. But now, I realized I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. I'd faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, and I'd come out the other side. That was something no one could take away from me. As life settled back into a new normal, I started thinking about my mom more often. Losing her had been the catalyst for so much pain, but her memory was also a source of strength. I began visiting her favorite spots around Seattle. Our favorite cafe, the park where we used to picnic, even the little bookstore where she'd buy me novels when I was a kid. Being in those places helped me feel closer to her, like she was still guiding me somehow. One day, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I found a photo album I hadn't seen in years. It was filled with pictures of my mom and me, laughing, baking, playing board games. There was one photo in particular that caught my eye. It was a picture of the two of us sitting on the porch, her arm around me, both of us grinning like we didn't have a care in the world. I framed that photo and put it on my nightstand. It reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart and who I could be again. It's been a year now since Diana and Ella were arrested. My dad and I are closer than we've ever been. We've made it a point to spend time together, whether it's cooking dinner, watching old movies, or just sitting on the porch talking about life. He's made mistakes, but he's working every day to make up for them, and I respect him for that. As for me, I've started taking classes at a local college. I'm studying psychology because I want to help people who've been through what I have, people who felt powerless and alone but don't know how to fight back. My experiences have given me a purpose, and that's something Diana and Ella can never take from me. Sometimes I think about them, where they are, what they're doing. I wonder if they regret what they did, or if they're still blaming everyone but themselves. But then I remind myself that it doesn't matter. Their story is no longer part of mine. Looking back, I realize that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can shape you, yes, but it doesn't have to break you. I've learned that revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about rising above them, proving that they didn't win. And that's exactly what I've done. This is my story, but it's also my beginning. I'm no longer the scared girl who is framed and forgotten. I'm Sophia, and I've taken my life back.